Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon in Europe. This is Jean-Jacques Kurma speaking today from Boston, and welcoming you to this webinar, which is going to talk about the valuation of biotech companies in Europe. This webinar is part of a series of conferences which are organized by both BioLabs and Servier. We're very happy to hold this conference in the framework of the Bio Europe conference, the Startup Springboard, and welcome to you all.
What is important today is really the debate we're going to have. And I'm really very excited to hear you, Jean-Jacques, as the chairman, and our dedicated speakers. And I'm available for any question if there's any.
Thank you very much, Olivier. And just very quickly to feed on, to continue in this vein, we are going to propose a new program for biotech companies, not only from Saclay, but from all of France and wider, to come to Boston through this Boston Saclay Biotech Exchange. If you want to know more, please feel free to flash this with your phone. We'll show it again at the end of the conference. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But without any further ado, let me introduce our speakers. I will ask them to turn on their video now so that you can actually see them live. We are happy to welcome today Sabine Dandiguian from Jeito Capital, a venture firm based in Paris. Peter Neubeck with Kurma Partners, who is based in Munich, and Johannes Fruehauf, who is based in the United States, the founder and co-founder and general partner of Mission BioCapital, with presence in both Boston and San Francisco. So maybe Sabine, if you would say a few words and introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Jean-Jacques. And first of all, I would like to thank BioLabs and Servier for the invitation. Such a fascinating topic about how we can improve in Europe. So in a few words, maybe starting with Jeito. So Jeito is a kind of young fund funded by Raphael Dorjman, a very famous lady who is both hemato-oncologist and since more than 15 years with a very great VC experience. And Jeito is a fund which is dedicated to breakthrough innovation. So we know scouting mainly in Europe, where we know that the science is very strong, but where there is lack of financing, as we will probably discuss later on, and lack of financing in continuity, which means that there is disruption when the leaders of the startup have to change lead investors, while Jeito is planning to accompany the company throughout their different rounds and help the leaders, I mean the startup CEOs, to focus on execution and really to get closer to success. So yeah, so I joined as an illustration of what we are in Jeito as a business leader. I've been company group chairman leading big businesses at Johnson & Johnson in Janssen for many years.
Thank you very much, Sabine. Johannes, maybe quickly your parkour as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Jacques, and thank you to Servier for helping us set up this panel. So I'm Johannes Fruehauf. I'm a physician from Germany. I'm now working out of Boston and help small biotech companies with space and with capital. Also, we have a small seed and Series A investment fund. We are now we have a portfolio of about 23 companies. We typically invest in very early stage companies that are seed, that we meet through this network of labs. And then we help them by being very hands-on investors. We don't just provide capital and look at what you do from the sidelines. We typically do take board seats and help recruit teams and connect them also with a network of pharmaceutical partners that can help them either develop the asset or eventually acquire an asset from them. And so we're currently investing out of our second fund, currently all focused on the United States, but clearly with an ambition to also expand into Europe.
Thank you very much, Johannes. And that brings us to our third panelist located in Europe, Peter.
Yeah, thanks also to BioLabs and to Servier. Thanks for having me. Great to be with you guys. I'm like Johannes, also another physician from Germany, actually trained also in Boston, but came back, as you realize. I'm now with the Kurma Partners, which is a French venture fund that has been around for more than 10 years now. And a little bit different than what Sabine told you about Jeito, we really focus on the early stage part of things. So very much like what Johannes is doing in Boston. We create companies, we work with academic groups and sort of incubate, maturate projects to the point where we then create companies and then take these companies to a first clinical proof of concept. We're currently investing out of Kurma Biofund 3, which is a 160 million euros vehicle, and go across all the therapeutic areas and across all technologies.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to turn to you, Peter, maybe looking at European companies and reasonably early companies, and to Johannes as well. Do you guys, when you look at all those companies, all that deal flow that's coming through, do you actually see a difference of valuation between European companies and US ones? Are those assets priced differently?
I mean, if I start, you know, I mean, in the end, there's one obvious reason for a price delta that you could see in valuations, and that's competition in terms of financing. You know, obviously, if you compare all of Europe, any area of Europe with, you know, hotspots like Boston or the West Coast in the US, you know, there's just not that much venture capital around. There's some public money around, there's good public grant money around. But when it comes to real sort of professional venture capital, professional financing, we still have big gaps. That's not only true in the early part, but also the late part that Sabine is covering. So just by that mere fact that we don't really have a working financial ecosystem, you know, there's a big difference. And that obviously goes further, because in the end, it's not only financing these companies through to a point of exit, but if one of the exit opportunities is public markets, as it is in the US, as you know, in Europe, we don't really have a functioning public market to exit biotech companies. And that there's many reasons for that. But again, I think if you take all of that together, that explains why we see a valuation difference there.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Johannes.
No, I wanted to sort of add my view to Peter's perspective, which I think is very similar. We often see companies. So I see companies when they want to come to the United States, or they're considering. We have a program that helps German startups to set foot in the United States. And what we see is often very solid science or very solid engineering at the basis of these companies. They often have as good a scientific base as the ones that we see coming out of the Boston ecosystem, MIT and Harvard. However, in many of these cases, they don't sell as well in the United States. So are having a hard time raising money in the United States because of a difference in approach, a difference in philosophy, a difference in personalities. And so some of that can be taught. I do think that the opportunity of keeping R&D in Europe, where we all know labor cost is still lower, even for highly trained PhD level scientists, is not a bad idea. But then what I would like to see companies and boards do early on is to leverage the opportunity that they have of doing very solid and maybe somewhat more cost efficient early stage R&D in Europe, but build a company to grow eventually and have access in the US, have access to US venture capital, maybe at Series B stage, have access, prepare all of the filings so that you can be eventually going public on one of the US exchanges. NASDAQ is sort of the straightforward one, but also some are now going public on the New York Stock Exchange. And so I think if boards think of that early on and they build the company accordingly, I think there's a lot of value to be had.
So let me ask Sabine a little bit. Thank you for that, Johannes. In the company that you look at, how do you encourage them? What is the goal? Do they aim high enough? Are they aiming for the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange?
Yes, I like very much the way Johannes described the selling attitude. I would rather say that we have super teams, super academic teams, super entrepreneurs, more and more growing pool of entrepreneurs. Maybe that's still an opportunity to improve here compared to the US. However, we really work with them to unleash the ambition, think big, think bigger, integrate since the beginning European and US market, integrate the sophistication of those two markets from the beginning. And it is obvious because when you talk about breakthrough innovation, the regulators, FDA, EMEA, the definition of breakthrough innovation is really converging. So there is an opportunity. So I think it's not only about training, it's also giving them the means to go for the ambition. And that is why Jeito is relatively big. Our first closing was at 200 million euros, and our target size is 500 million euros, not only because we like to be big, but because you can tell the companies, I am next to you, with you, for your ambition. We would like to build the new unicorns out of European science. And I totally agree, Johannes. We need probably to train, to allow them and to say, well, don't worry, you will not have to go on the road to raise money every 3 years. We can be lead investor. We can help you to design the right clinical development to accelerate access to patients. Because that's where the Jeito, like you were describing, is also coaching the companies. There are acceleration paths now, both in the US and in Europe, when you talk about hopeless patients, when you talk about breakthrough innovation. So it is not an easy target, but it's something that the quality of science should aim for.
So this brings to me an interesting concept, because both of you mentioned that you're next to your companies and helping them and coaching them. Peter, when you start, and I know that Kurma has worked a lot to actually help create companies. When you work with the entrepreneurs, when you know, in the US, trying to build one of those unicorns, part of the motivation is, of course, to bring medicines to the patient and save the world. Part of it is to become, you know, the next richest man after Elon Musk. What is the relationship to money in Europe propelling the companies, or do we need to change our way of thinking and negotiating with you because we want to have more of a bigger share of the pie?
That's a very good question. I think, I mean, obviously, there's a big distinction to be made between sort of what is happening in tech versus biotech in Europe, because I think in tech, Europe has very much caught up with what's happening in the US. You know, we have, I mean, if you take Berlin, it's a hotspot in tech, and you have a first generation of guys who are basically billionaires who made money with Flixbus and other apps and other sort of technological advances. So there is a generation of people that have made a lot of money. And I think in biotech, obviously, this is less pronounced. I mean, there are some good examples also in Germany and also in France where people have made money, but I think it's obviously still you know, less pronounced. Let's put it this way. But then again, you know, I think nowadays, if we talk to academic leaders, to researchers, I think they obviously, the world is so interconnected, so they see what's happening in the US. So I mean, all of them are also certainly thinking of, you know, what does this mean to me personally? Because I think 10 years back, especially in Germany, you know, I mean, if you have tenure in university, that's a very sort of good way of living. You know, you have a clear salary, you have lots of freedom of research, you know, there's not really much to lose and maybe not that much to gain somewhere else. But nowadays things have become differently, you know, it's not that easy anymore. And I think people realize, you know, in this world with growing uncertainties, but also growing chances, you know, maybe making that leap from an academic, you know, sort of very sort of comfortable, you know, position to actually becoming a founder and taking that risk, but also, you know, maybe reaping a great benefit, I think has really changed. So if I talk to people now compared to 10, 15 years ago, there's already a big change to be seen.
I do want to speak to this topic because I feel it's very important that our biotech founders do not get motivated by making a quick buck. I think that's the beauty of our field, is that most of our founders, I think the very vast majority, are really driven by the desire to advance their science and to make impact in therapeutic advancements, right? And I think that's what makes us motivated to be part of that too. It is nice that some of the achievements are then rewarded with good financial gains, but don't go into biotech trying to become rich quick. If you get rich, good on you, but then you will get rich only because you've built a very meaningful product that helps patients, right? And so don't go, let's make sure that people don't misunderstand this discussion.
Sabine, you wanted to say something.
I totally agree with you, Johannes. During my experience as business leader at Johnson & Johnson, I built and I turned around big businesses. It was a consequence of what we did well in terms of patient access. Once you are working well on the target, on the patient's targeted population, on the definition of value, on the acceleration, then you get the right price and you get the right top line. So I built billions of businesses because my obsession was a patient. Now, the commercial success is a consequence and should stay a consequence. And I also recognize that there is a cultural difference between Europe and US, considering the money. In the US, when you are super successful, you announce how much you earn. In Europe, you are kind of shy of declaring. So that is progressing, and that's good. And I just read one of the questions, and Ahmed raised a very good point on them. There are big funds in the US in terms of size. And I would like maybe to share with the panelists what we observe right now. Jeito is a big fund which would like to be considered as competitive as the US funds, with understanding the European culture. But what we observe right now is that US funds are not only followers, they have identified that Europe is such an interesting place because the valuations are very low and at the same time the science so good. So until now we were seeing funds which were followers. Now they put competitive term sheet as leaders. So we should definitively organize ourselves in the ecosystem. We discussed that with Peter in order to strengthen our ecosystem of financing to be able to accompany our jewels far away.
So let me challenge you just a little bit, Sabine, there, because you were mentioning how at J&J you were able to focus on the top line and accessing many markets. We have a question here that potentially the US firms are too high, the valuations may be too high. It's going to be a reflection of the market potential at some point. So when you're a startup and you have limited resources, which are not the resources of a J&J, how do you look at market access? And are the French and German company that may be looking at their own individual markets, are they hampered by that? There's still 27 individual markets in Europe. So should they first target the US market? How do you recommend a biotech company go about market access?
Yeah. That's so interesting. I've been president of Europe at G&G Medical, so I really worked a lot on that complexity of Europe compared to the giant American. Even if America is not one payer, it is not one state, so it has also its complexity in terms of market access. First of all, I should say that Europe is a fantastic 27 members, but if you take the markets, you have to consider only the big 5 plus the US, and then you cover more than 70–80% of your potential for innovation. So let's not be overwhelmed and terrified by complexity. Is not that complex. Secondly, as I mentioned, definition of breakthrough innovation is converging because the guidelines to treat immuno-oncology, third-line patients in certain cancer is converging among the very developed countries, let's say like US and big 5 in Europe. So let's not be overwhelmed. If at the beginning, before entering into human, you start to consider your target product profile, meaning what will be the first population that I will target and what is the value I bring to this population. Then you start to build your story. You can go to the FDA, and we have people in the US already that can help you, the companies we have chosen, because we have decided since the first day to have a presence in the US. But you can have pre-IND meeting with the FDA if you are in a breakthrough scientific innovation. And they tell you it's very transparent. The process is very, very transparent. So we should not be lost. Definitively, the European companies should not start by their home country only. It's a pity. They should immediately integrate US Big Five. And when you talk real innovation, that's a tough part. Real innovation for to start with, hopeless population. So the more advanced, the more severe, if you can offer something to those patients, then the doors are opening and you can really accelerate both Europe and US. So we are, and when we say, let's try to think big, is also exactly what we do. We try to help, challenge, but also help the companies to think Big Five plus US from the beginning.
In just a couple of minutes that we have, maybe Peter, one of the questions that was asked there is, should the science speak for itself and the finances will follow? Do you need to actually look at the markets early, find the money? How do you recommend a company grow, taking into account what has been said and thinking of all those markets?
You know, obviously, when you look at projects, even at the earliest stage, obviously the market opportunity is relevant. But in the end, I mean, it's an unmet medical need question at the beginning. You know, is there, you know, are we solving a problem that's not solved right now? And you know, I mean, if that is the case, then there will be also a market. And there's obviously details. The devil is always in the details regarding reimbursement and things like that. But in the end, that's an ingoing question when we start doing investments already. And you know, so speaking to Sabine's part, you know, in the end, what is important early enough is already to think of not so much what is, you know, 10 years from now, the commercialization plan, but how do I sort of gear up my translational plan, i.e. also my clinical plan, to link that up with US centers, for example. So the earliest part, when we think about sort of translating projects from Europe into the US, is sort of to think about sort of where do we do actually some parts of our clinical development plan. So that's where it starts out for us.
So with that, I would like to share my screen and maybe as one comment, make companies and our auditors aware of this program where they can come for 1 week to Boston and potentially meet with partners, with clinicians, and with other key advisors that you may want. I suspect that all of you are not recommending for those companies to move over to the US, but to grow incorporating the US. And maybe if one of you wants to have a last statement before, I'm afraid we have to close this session, I will give one of you the opportunity to take that last comment. Sabine.
Yeah, well, our dream is to keep the presence in Europe, obviously. Don't forget your roots, and envisage from the beginning a strong presence in the US, because as I experienced, Americans talk well to Americans, and when you have to go to the FDA, and it's better to have some people who understand. It's not only a question of language. So if we can build big companies out of Europe, that's really our dream, our mission. We believe in the European ecosystem, and at the same time envisage and start with a presence in the US with US people.
So to our audience, whatever your stage, the stage of your company, as you are growing your company, please feel free to reach to Peter in Germany, to Johannes in Boston, or to Sabine in Paris. And I'm sure that they will be very happy to talk with you and see how they can help you. You can also come to this program, and we look forward to welcoming you either on this program or hopefully also at our next conference that will be held in a couple of weeks. with this, thank you very much to all of our panelists, and we are very, very thankful to the audience, the questions, and talk to you very soon.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. Thanks, everybody.
Much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.